Hello, and welcome to episode 68 of My Dog Will Eat My Face. Incidentally, my dog is curled up next to me right now with his eyes closed, sleeping away, so he's adorable. Anyway, one thing I wanted to talk about is the worst symptoms are of dying. You know, I'm sure everyone has a different experience when they die. And I know that a lot of people too will not want to hear this podcast because they don't want to hear about the symptoms of dying. But maybe, just maybe, someone could use this information to better understand what someone they know or a relative is going through if they're in the same experience as I am. Perhaps some of my experience that I share can be applied to better assist and better care for a loved one who is also dying. Maybe that's the best case scenario. So I don't reveal this to get any sort of pain credit or to whine and cry about it. I share this honestly hoping that people better understand what it's like so that in different circumstances they can use that information in a good way. Even maybe one day to help yourself through this process. So I do understand, like I said in the very beginning, everyone's experience is different. So I don't claim to have the sort of encyclopedia entry of the symptoms of dying. That would be quite a bit of hubris on my part. And I'm not saying that at all. I'm just sharing what my experience is. And I've told you the reasons why I'm sharing those experiences. And I think now's a good time to share them because I've been in the process, I think, long enough to kind of calculate what the worst is. I've not yet obviously experienced death yet. That in itself might be the worst part. So I might be missing a lot of information. But in this long course of dying, I hope to share some valuable information, with my followers who listen to this podcast. So, with that all given, here are what I think some of the worst symptoms of dying. A quick sidebar before I get into these things that I think are the worst part of dying, or at least the components of dying, maybe not the worst. And I can't believe I used the word sidebar. If anyone else is repulsed by that, don't worry about it, so am I. You can tell I worked in the corporate world. Oh, God. Anyway, I did want to take a moment to describe a little bit as to why I chose this topic for today's podcast. The reason is I've been through hell and back in the last week. It's just been genuinely awful for me. I've fallen down many times. I've passed out many times. One time I passed out caused me to lose my glasses because they fell off my head when I was passed out, and then I couldn't find them until today. It's also caused memory issues, cognitive issues, and it's also, I hate to say this publicly, but it's also caused a lot of incontinence. So, being that I have this experience, and just in the last week it's been in particularly bad for me. It's sort of why I choose this topic now, because I think I have the appropriate data points to make this list without too many surprises. As I said, I haven't died yet, and that might be the worst part, or something. I don't know. I won't know how to rank that, because I'll be dead, and that'd be awesome to know if that is the best part or the worst part of dying, so to speak. That's a good question. If anyone can communicate with a ghost, please ask them that. Okay, but I just want to give that brief description as to why I've chosen this topic for this week. It's really just because, again, the last week has been a horrific series of events that exhibited all of these things that I'm about to discuss. So, there's some of the reasoning why I wanted to do this topic now. Well, just based off what I've shared with respect to the previous week, I think it's safe to say that for me so far, the worst part of dying is the pain. And that's something I totally did not expect. I just sort of imagined that I would simply fade away, because my problem or problems, however you want to say it, all go back to my heart. And it's not like I don't think I have pain nerves on my heart or anything like that. Of course, a heart attack can be terrible and painful. So I don't know. I mean, I sort of pictured it as though I were just fading away into nothing. So that's why it really surprised me that, oh no, oh no, sir, you're going to be given the gauntlet of pain. And that's what's happened and what's happening. I'm in excruciating pain right now on my right back. Before that and before today, I was experiencing pain pretty much all over my body. Just from head to toe, I was in pain. And that has resolved a little bit today, but it will recur. This is a pattern that it does. It gets viciously painful by doing nothing on my part. And then, so it gets better, and then it comes back. Better, and then back. And so that's sort of the pattern that I've experienced. But on top of just the baseline pain, I guess is what I'm describing, there's all the injuries that go on and harm me and are extremely painful. For example, falling. I know people would laugh at those commercials on the TV. I did when I was a kid. I saw I fallen down and I can't get up old lady commercials. I remember laughing at that with my friends when I was in 5th grade, somewhere around there when it started. And I really didn't think it would be a big deal of falling down. It'd be like falling down, like slipping on ice. We've all slipped on ice. How bad could it be? Apparently, that's all dreadfully wrong. With my falling, which is a huge part of my late stage heart failure, sometimes I can get away with it. I have a soft landing, whether, I land on my bed or a soft chair, or, somehow my downfall is broken and the velocity isn't so severe. Things like that happen, and it's not a big deal. And then there are other times on the other extreme where falling results in extensive injury, heavy amounts of pain. One time I fell from my bed to the floor, and that messed me up for weeks. And I had huge bruises, huge, all over both arms, my back, and a gash mark on my back from me cashing it on something as I fell down, probably the nightstand. And all the way down to my legs and feet hurting for some random reason. I don't know how they got injured. But basically, everything in the body hurt from that one fall. And when I hit the ground, it wasn't a pleasant, soft touchdown. It was like I got hit by a truck. So pain, seriously, is just extreme in my case. And it might be so true in a lot of other cases. Now, some people get around this part of dying by putting their loved ones in a home atmosphere where they're always watched and they're generally in a comfortable setting, and falls are prevented as much as humanly possible with an extensive staff. Now, that kind of thing scares me to death. I don't want to be in a nursing home. I am only 44 years old. I couldn't imagine being in a nursing home. So, in my experience, yes, pain is the worst part of dying. I would not grant it to anyone, honestly. But here's the good part. I've recovered from all these incidents. They happen and I recovered. I recovered each time. All the bruises from that massive fall when I fell to the bed are now finally gone. I was talking to my nurse about this just the other day. I said, wow, I can't believe I recovered so well from that massive fall. And she said, yeah, I can't believe it either. Most of my other patients, that would be the end for them. And I said, well, what gives? Why am I different? Why am I not dying from these massive falls and physical incidents? She said, well, basically, well, I really don't know. Which is, I guess, an honest answer. But she said, she continued that. She said, in addition to that, she kind of clarified a little bit and said, no, I think you're special. And not in like some stupid evangelical way. She's not like that. She said that. She even clarified this is why she says that. It's because I am only 44. Most of her other patients and most people in hospice don't recover from the things I recover from. Absolutely. But and again, most people in hospice are elderly. You know, they're 70 or 80 years old. And I'm 44. And she said, she even admitted to this. She said, you're 44 and you have no other major diseases. So you're lasting a lot longer. Which is a nice way of saying to me, so your death is going to take much longer. It's going to be a long process because your body is going to fight so hard to keep you alive. That's what I took that to believe. And I would buy that. So that was interesting. But anyway, back to the topic. Yes, pain is the worst part of dying. At least it's been that way for me. And it was a total shock because I did not think this kind of death would be painful. But it apparently is. If this can be painful, I think a lot more can be too. And a lot of people are not expecting that. So, for you, listener, take this as a warning. Dying can be very painful. Be prepared for that somehow. And don't be like me and say, I was totally unexpecting this. No one ever told me this was going to be that bad. So, you can't say that. I have told you. It's the worst part. And it can be absolutely dreadful. I think another major issue that comes along with dying is, quite unfortunately, the isolation. Most people don't want to talk about death or even be around somebody who's dying. And so they avoid it, or they avoid the person dying. I can tell you firsthand, that's what happens. And when I brought that up with my hospice team, they stated that that is unfortunately very, very common. Because again, most people don't want to talk about death or talk to someone who's dying. So the isolation is very problematic from that standpoint. You lose your friends. At least I did. I have a few stranglers hanging on by a thread. But for the most part, my social life collapsed. But there's another reason. And I guess I'll put this into the same category. Another reason of the isolation, I should say, is I'm physically stuck. So this is just my case. It's not going to be for everyone, but I'm physically stuck in my apartment and have been for 2 years. Because I can't breathe enough oxygen into my bloodstream. And eventually suffocates. Sorry, kind of lost a little bit there. And suffocate if I don't have supplemental oxygen applied to me at all times. So I can't breathe at all. And the amount of oxygen that is being applied to me is enormous. It's like it feels like what do you call it? A leaf blower blasting into my nose. That's how it feels. But in this case, it's just the oxygen they're throwing in there. So basically, I'm tied to these machines. And I can't leave to go anywhere, because to get that supplemental oxygen, I need 2 huge 80-pound machines to follow me everywhere I go, which is just not going to happen. So that's another cause of the isolation. So it's not just the friends kind of bailing on you. At least in my case, it's because of how I'm being treated for my condition. Isolates me. But that brings me to, I think, the next worst part of dying, but it might be relatively rare and unique to me. And I'll just discuss that here in the next segment. This one sort of ties, I think, with the last one, because this one is actually the cause of some of the isolation, like I said. I'm tied to 2 huge machines and really can't go anywhere because of that. So, what I'm tied to those 2 machines for is oxygen, like I said, and I need a massive amount to stay alive. So I'm going to say the shortness of breath or lack of oxygen is tied with this in my case. I think it might be relatively not as common as the other issues of dying that I've addressed. But at least in my case, in the case of many other people, the inability to breathe can be really problematic, needless to say. It's a really lousy feeling. If you're not on oxygen, you feel, you can die. You feel terrible. Your oxygen can keep you alive, but if you remove it, you desaturate, as they say, in oxygen. And I do very quickly. And that is extremely dangerous and could lead to heart attack, heart stopping, instant death, and other issues, severe issues. If you don't have enough oxygen, it will kill you. So, needless to say, I need these machines, and this shortness of breath or inability to breathe, whatever you want to call it, is really lousy. I won't apply that to my worst enemies. It's difficult because it, for one, causes isolation because you're stuck at home, more than likely. 2, I mean, it sort of becomes your whole life. The nurses come over, in my case, every week. One of the things they check are my oxygen levels, make sure what that's at and follow that. That's one of the big things they follow, obviously, in my case. But I sort of expected this one to be probably the worst component of dying. So I think I was just wrong with respect to how bad it is compared to the other things that happen when you're dying. So I'll provide an example, a recent example. I had just somebody over at my apartment for a service call, like a maintenance guy. It wasn't a maintenance guy, I can't remember, it was like a delivery. Someone visited my apartment for some other, like a package delivery or some maintenance in my apartment. I can't remember, honestly. Hey, that goes back to lack of cognition as being a serious problem when dying. But anyway, I decided I would show him out towards the elevators so he could find his way home, or find his way out of the building and go home. And so I used my emergency tank that has wheels on it and turned it all the way up to 15 liters of oxygen. And with that, I took him out of the apartment and I made it only probably 10 to 20 feet before I had to tell him, I'm sorry, but you're going to go on without me. And I sort of gave him a shorthand description of where to go. He's like, oh yeah, don't worry about it. But yeah, so even with supplemental oxygen, it might not be enough, as it is in my case with supplemental portable oxygen. The best we can do on portable oxygen is just not enough. I immediately desat. It's too low. 15 liters is too low for me. And that's the maximum amount of oxygen that these machines can pump out when you're traveling. I'm on 16 to 18 liters. So as soon as I put this other oxygen on, I'm desaturating my oxygen rate. So yeah, the lack of oxygen, the lack of breathing, and all the components that come with it are absolutely lousy. You can feel short of breath throughout the day, and it's frustrating and scary at the same time. In fact, I'll tell you a quick story. It's pretty old, but it's a good example of how shortness of breath can be so scary and miserable. But there was one day, a few years back, I want to say maybe 2 years, I was actually still working. And I was working from home that particular day, because it was a Friday. And I had my dog with me, just right next to me as I was typing away at someone or whatever I was doing. when suddenly I felt really short of breath. And it just got severe. So I was like, gosh, I'm going to put on my oxygen. Because at the time, I only used oxygen at night when I slept. But not during the day. But in this case, I'm like, gosh, I'm going to put that on and try to get some O's. So I did that, and I looked at my pulse oximeter, which tells me my oxygen rate and my heart rate. But my oxygen was fine. It was in the high 90s. But my heart rate was too high to measure. It was over 200 beats per minute. So I got really scared. I tried to lay down to calm everything down, and nothing would do it. Nothing would calm down my heart, and I constantly felt out of breath artificially. It's just crazy to me. I felt out of breath, severely out of breath, and yet I wasn't, because my oxygen was perfectly fine. And eventually I got an overwhelming fear of dread. There's a dread over me of what was happening and that I might die. I just had an overwhelming dread that this was it, so to speak. So I called 911 and they all came over. I got admitted to the hospital, and while I was there in bed, my cardiologist walked in, and the first thing he did is ask the nurse to leave the room so we could have some privacy, which I knew was not a good sign. But she left the room, and my cardiologist said what happened was that my right ventricle failed completely. And I'm very lucky if I continue to live at all much longer. He said at that point, I'll give you 2 to 3 years to live. And I asked him, so does that mean I should start with final preparations? And he nodded his head and said yes. And after a little bit of talking back and forth, he left the room, and I was just there in this quiet, empty hospital room after being told I'm on the path of death. But anyway, not being able to breathe is illustrated in the condition I had when my right ventricle was failing, because the shortness of breath was debilitating. It was scary, and physically it can get even worse than that. You could actually have organs fail. You could have critical heart issues, which was, I guess, my case, but that was the cause, not a result. So, yeah, shortness of breath and lack of being able to breathe is a problem. It's not the problem in all deaths, but I share it here as one of my top issues. So that's that. So that's my top 3 list of the worst components of dying. Of course, there are probably hundreds of more features of dying that I dislike that I could share here. But I just really wanted to give out the enormous top 3 heavy weighters that bother me and disturb me as I'm dying. And I'm also not doing this as a cry festival. I'm just saying, oh, woe is me. I'm not doing that. I'm sharing this because I honestly hope that if somebody better understands what it's like to be dying, they can be better prepared and not so surprised when it's their turn. Or they can also help someone else or better understand them, if it's a loved one or a friend or just even an acquaintance, if they're going through a fatal process. Perhaps you can be more empathetic to whatever their needs may be. So that's honestly my goal. But again, I could list many more. I think the number one issue for me, apart from all this, is the stupid oxygen hose I have to wear. It gets caught on everything. It's a pain in the butt. It's always getting kinks in it you have to find and fix, and it's just a nightmare. It's strapped to your face all the time, and you get caught on things as you're walking by, tables or even the wall. I swear to God, my stupid oxygen hosing gets caught on the wall. I don't even know how that works. Jeez. That's the number one problem. Probably for me. Apart from these 3 things. But in all seriousness, at least what I'm sharing has been my experience. And that is the bottom line purpose of this whole podcast, is to share my experiences and to reach out to the world so that maybe perhaps someone could learn something from my experience or my mess ups. At least I hope some of that occurs. And if you made it this far, I definitely am impressed that you had given so much of your time to listen to my blabbing. And revealing of what I'm going through as I die. So I thank you very much for listening to this podcast and giving it your time. I sincerely mean that. I deeply appreciate all of you who listen. And thank you so much for giving me your busy time, just a part of it, to share what I'm going through. So if you want to make sure that you are shared with the podcast, don't just click share, click turn on notifications, because sharing doesn't mean anything anymore. It doesn't tell you anything. If you click on the option to get notifications, it will notify you of new podcasts that you would otherwise miss. You can tune into them when they're made available. So definitely share and turn on notifications so you're around for future podcasts as I take this journey. And so with that, as I lose my voice, as you can tell, but for now, I have to hopefully speak to you again next week. And auf Wiedersehen.